Hey, so I think you guys can see us, so I'm just gonna dive right in. My name is Danny Lore. I want to welcome you guys to the 2021 Brooklyn Book Festival's Building Worlds in Speculative Storytelling panel. From creating slice of life cyclops and mermaid stories to horror-infused dramas and Afrofuturist epics, world building, complete with specific rules, cultures, and logic, is no small feat. Our panelists, who will introduce themselves shortly, are here to discuss unique challenges and joys regarding speculative storytelling. And since I know that you will absolutely be intrigued by the stories and worlds they create, I want to note to you guys that our panelists' books will all be available to purchase, I believe from a link below the stream. I'm seeing it from Zoom, so I can't see the link right now. So apologies if I'm directionally challenged. But you'll be able to grab everyone's books. So they're all going to introduce themselves. To start simply in order of how you guys appear on my screen. So John, you want to start?
Sure. Quickly, my name is John Jennings, and I am an award-winning graphic novelist, artist, and writer. I'm also a professor of media and cultural studies at the University of California at Riverside, where I teach classes on Afrofuturism, race and horror, and comics. My current book is an adaptation of the African Jujuist short story, On the Road by Nnedi Okorafor. It's called After the Rain, and that book is the first of a new Abrams Megascope line of graphic novels, which focuses on speculative comics that center people of color, and I'm the founder and curator of that line.
Thank you so much, John. Kat, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kat Leyh. I'm a Chicago-based graphic novelist, comics creator, writer, artist. I've worked a bunch on Lumberjanes. My graphic novel Snapdragon came out last 2 years ago. Nope, yep, 2 years ago. And my book Thirsty Mermaids, which I'm going to be talking a lot about today, came out a bit earlier. And it's a slice of life mermaid story for adults.
Thanks. Aminder, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Aminder Dhaliwal. I'm a graphic novelist in Los Angeles. I also work in animation. I've worked at Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Disney, etc. And my first graphic novel, Woman World, came out with Drawn and Quarterly in 2018. And my second graphic novel, Cyclopedia Exotica, which explores the minority experience in a world, like it's a world of cyclops and two eyes, came out in May of this year.
Thanks so much. And last but not least, Tim.
Hello, my name is Tim Fielder, lifelong visual Afrofuturist and graphic novelist. I am known for doing this book here, Infinitum, an Afrofuturist tale, published by HarperCollins Amistad earlier this year. And I'm also the graphic novelist of the series Maddie's Rocket, which will be experiencing very soon a reboot.
Excellent, guys. So I think that a lot of people find world building, there's like kind of a range of reactions to that term, right? Like some people think of it as a very specific thing and some people think of it as kind of a much broader term. So it doesn't have to go in a particular order, or I can, round table it if no one goes first. I just wanted to have you guys talk for a moment about what your personal definition of the phrase world building is. Like when you think of doing world building, what does that mean?
Okay, go ahead. Go
ahead, Tim. No, go ahead. You started.
I think for me, world building is either a visual or written based process of adding plausibility. It makes things believable. And that can be done through visuals or that can be done through the written word. When it comes to graphic novels, that's what world building is.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think world building to me involves thinking so much about the world that you're writing, the rules, what life is like, how it differs from our own, if at all. Thinking about all these intricate details that never make it into the story. It's all about having a lot of these worlds in my own head and understanding them in depth, but then communicating it in small ways throughout the story, and not always explaining everything in the story, but just having it fully realized in my head, and then hoping that a lot of it comes through the context in the book.
Is it me next?
I don't know.
Okay.
I wrote a definition.
Oh, okay. Well, my version, I actually really like what's already been said. I especially like Tim, you said making believable, like that's a very interesting take, I think, because to me, world building has been crafting a space which best pushes the tension or the themes of a story that you're trying to tell. So it's not only making a world believable, but also making the unbelievable believable, because it's specifically pushing the narrative you're trying to tell.
That's right. Now I feel like really like an appendage now, because basically I'm going to say the same thing everybody else just said. Anyway, so I thought about it, and I came up with world building as the act of creating a plausible spatial narrative system that supports the characters, storyline, and themes of a given story that naturally augments the suspension of disbelief for the reader, viewer, or player.
All right.
Well, the jumped out, and I think I love that.
Hey, what'd you say?
Just that the professor jumped out, and I appreciated that.
You gotta. Well, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I was trying to be,
But see, I think that I was thinking that that's like a really. I wanted to start with the definition, because I don't think that we can really start about process without kind of knowing where each of you come from, right? Because different people watching are going to have different concepts of what world building means, and if they can know where you're coming from, they can understand how better to kind of apply processes that we will get into. Now, I know that particularly since you guys are do a lot of the majority of the panel does a lot of cartoonist work, as opposed to, whereas I am strictly a writer, because even my stick figures are terrifying to behold. I know where my talents lie, and it is not in panel layouts. But I was kind of wondering for you guys then, where do you guys find the kind of brunt of the world building labor happening? Right. I know I've had projects where I either alone or with the rest of my collaborators create a whole world Bible first. I've had other projects where a lot of it happens in the moment, and then more so in prose than art-based stuff like comics, for obvious reasons. I've had other ones that happen more in the edits of a project. But I was kind of wondering where you guys see kind of the brunt of that labor happening, and kind of how do you guys approach it? Let's mix it up. Kat, if you want to go first.
Sure. A lot of the world building that I come up with usually happens pretty early on, but also as I write it. As I write a story, I'll usually figure things out, because I need to solve problems within the story by figuring out those rules in the world. Most of, if not all of my stories are fantasy, even if it's just a small amount of magical realism. So a lot of that is figuring out how the magic works in this world, how much it affects this world, how much it makes it different from the world that we're more familiar with, and then also deciding what I want to bring over from reality into fiction.
Tim, you want to go first next?
Oh,
I know
sure.
numbers.
No. I will mirror what Kat said. I would just say that I would emphasize and totally 1000% agree with the idea that world building doesn't end till you're done. You understand, the smallest character trait can embed and reveal what the environment, what the setup is. And that goes on. So what is it that said, you, as a world builder, you're always, for me at least, looking to add plausibility, but you're trying to add that plausibility by utilizing dramatic opportunity. And so that's an ongoing process. So color, shape, in my case, since I'm a wholly digital artist, that's now integrate different skill sets like 3D animation, modeling, all that kind of thing, because it really does, like in the game industry, allow me to add things on a dramatically more dynamic scale, although it's for the same medium of graphic novels.
Excellent. Aminder, if you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, it's for slice of life, it kind of feels a little different since I do start off with like a set of rules. There's no Bible, there's no big Bible that I'm like continuously like referring to, but there's a small set of rules that aren't set in stone. They're very adaptable as I continue making comics. A lot of it, I just try and reflect whatever the tone of that specific comic that I'm posting or that I'm working on the page for, what that comic needs to be pushed. So if it's literal spaces, I have a character who starts with like they're in a bar and that's where they feel anxiety, but then later on in their own story, that the bar is where they go to feel the confident. So I'm just trying to set up these kind of rules that like that character and their feelings in these spaces grows, it adapts. There's a lot of I really like what Tim said about like how it's continuous. I actually had never thought about that, how like it is kind of never ending. And I've had the benefit of getting to start online with webcomics and then getting to re-edit it as it becomes a book. And you get to kind of fix as you go. But a lot of it I also like is retconning and having to almost like adapt to my own canon that I've set and having to allow myself, I guess, to make those mistakes because our world is also messy. So it is continuous and a little seed at the front end. And then the real joy to me is just continuously working on it. So I really like that answer. I could just listen to Tim.
John?
So everyone has said things that I think about a lot when I think about world building. Kat mentioned affect to a certain degree, right? It's like how that particular story system is affecting you emotionally and things of that nature. Aminder is talking about the space kind of being an extension of the character. And I'm very much into like, the space as a prosthetic of the characters. And this idea of continually world building is extremely interesting to me too, Tim. A lot of my training is in graphic design. So I tend to think about story systems. I think about like how one system relates to the other and how a lot of times these worlds are like nested within each other. And of course, worlds are really large, right? So I always try to figure out like what part of the world I want to like think about, narratively. And I was really inspired by this book called The 7 Beauties of Science Fiction by Isfan Cesarni-Rone. And he basically lays out 7 different aspects of world building in science fiction in particular. And one of them is what he calls the fictive novum, or that, the new idea, right? And it could be like time travel. It could be, being able to go through parallel universes and stuff. And then I'm really interested in how that fictive novum then affects other types of technologies that have to either manage it or pop up because of it, that kind of thing. That's really interesting to me. Then I'm also just as interested in how because of how we live in a capitalist system, so something that's new will eventually become mundane. And I'm very interested in how, like, something like a light bulb or a car becomes mundane, even though it was like this magical thing that was invented. And so, because I think that honestly, like, plausibility a lot of times comes through the mundane, like the things like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to time travel to 1914 to go do this thing today. You know what I'm saying? So I'm really interested in those kinds of aspects too. And also on the visual side, I'm really interested in character design. So I don't have like these massive, world building Bibles, even though I probably should, but I do like a lot of sketching, and I like, I'm really into thinking about like how that character kind of is reified in the drawing itself. So.
Thank you guys. I think it helps me a lot. I really enjoy hearing specifically the process of people who do different and also additional work to script writing, I think, because I think that it changes your definition of what like a world Bible would be, right? That I see a lot of times, if you are able to enact that visual component, you're not going to have as much weight in that kind of text-based guide, or on the flip side, that you will have more, since you'll have much more of a visual component, like there's more labor in the art, but there's more words if you don't have the art, if that makes sense. One of the things that I was really interested in, that Tim said early on, was the idea of adding plausibility. And I think that all of you have kind of touched on that, which is great, in part because originally this question was kind of focused more on Kat and Aminder's work, because you do a lot of slice of life work in your books. But I think that it's really interesting to kind of broaden that, to talk about the concept of adding plausibility more specifically. So like the ways in which what are the ways in which you choose to use metaphor versus being more literal, I guess, in world building? Like when do you choose, for example, whether you're going to talk about oppression in the form of Cyclops and then landing it in a joke that is about race, and those kind of differentiations. What do you decide creates that plausibility, and when do you decide that it needs to be metaphorical? Tim started that with that word, so I'm going to point it at you.
Okay, so I'll be very brief. For me, can't speak for anyone else, can only speak for myself. When I'm utilizing that plausibility that I mentioned, I'm actually taking into account what Kat said. That plausibility doesn't have to be realistic. It just has to sell the story. It has to rope the character in. The philosophy I use, because I'm a concept design head. I grew up Ralph McQuarrie, Sid Mead, all those guys. That's what I do, right?
You can see that in your work, especially in Infinitum. I think there's a lot of. Thank you. I was feeling that, like a lot of
you picked that up. Excellent.
For anyone who has not gotten a chance to read it yet, there's a lot of vibes of like the art books of like classic sci-fi designers.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm sitting here blushing, man. I was happy for
this. You are blushing. Oh,
I'm glad. Anyway, so I'll be very brief so the other guys can talk here. So when they built the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars, it was just balsa wood. It was just fiberglass. But, and obviously Millennium Falcon's not real. So how did they make it look real? They used a technique called Greeblies, where they went to a model shop for kit models and they bashed it. They called it kit bashing. And they would post meticulously, a very meticulous pasting of detail on the surface, but at least you could see patterns. You didn't know what it was. It just looked like it could work, meaning that it was plausible. So I apply that philosophy either through my visuals or through my words, sometimes combined, sometimes separately. And that's the focus. If I can achieve that, right, then I've won. And then the audience has won.
It's actually funny because I didn't know what the early sources of that word was. I'm a Gundam builder, and kit bashing is used really regularly when you just kind of this arm from this Gundam, you know, and put it together, and it's really interesting hearing hearing it used in that way. I almost want to I want to ask the same question to Kat next, specifically because one of the things I found really interesting in Thirsty Mermaids was the most plausible thing for me was what you decided they knew and didn't know. A lot of times in fantastical stories where you get someone shape-shifting to living on the land or living in another environment, I may have my sense of realism pulled because I'm like, well, they would know what that thing was, right? Like, but I didn't find myself experiencing that in your work. And I'm almost interested in you talking about plausibility in terms of what you choose for them not to know and like what doesn't fit in their world, if that makes sense. Because I think that in particular, you do that really well.
Thank you. Yeah, there was so much more I felt like I could have added to the story about things that the mermaids who find themselves forced to live as humans in this world that they know nothing about. There's so many things that they wouldn't understand. Like almost everything that they encounter, they wouldn't really have context for, and that was a lot of fun. Just to explore our culture and our world through their eyes, like the concept of clothing, like just wearing clothes, like what clothes do you have to wear? Is it okay to not wear a top? Is it okay to not wear shoes? Like, do you have to wear everything all together? What are the rules? How does money work? How do you get money? Why do you need money? All these things that are very fun to explore. As readers, and I could have just kept going and going and going with that, with all the things that they wouldn't know and all the jokes and misunderstandings from that. But I did also introduce the idea of magazines and things that they would have found probably in human trash, because Lord knows there's so much of that in the ocean that they would probably have access to. So anything that I didn't have time to have them come to understand in the story, I could say that they got enough context from magazines to maybe understand it, but for the most part, they would have no context for a lot of human things that they come across. It's also just a fun exercise as a writer to really think about how to explain this concept that's so familiar to us that we don't even have to think about it to people that don't understand it at all. And another aspect of that, I think that was in the question, is the metaphor and what we choose to use as metaphor. And a really common thing that you see in science fiction, I think, is, this alien species and they're oppressed, and that's a metaphor for racism. But then for the human characters, they're all white. Like, that was a common critique, I think probably more so now looking back, of the X-Men series, where the oppression that the mutants faced in the X-Men in the beginning was very tied to real civil rights movements of the day, like with race, but also with gay rights and all sorts of forms of oppression that we're familiar with in the real world. And then the mutants were used as an allegory for that, but they were all white characters. So the fact that I have one of the mermaids dealing with body dysmorphia, I wanted to make sure that there was also a trans character in the story that could talk about that. It wasn't something necessarily that that character dealt with, but she was familiar with it and was able to talk and relate to this very foreign alien creature, pretty much, about this thing that they shared. So anything that I have an allegory for, or there's like a real world equivalent to in fantasy, I like to also draw attention to the fact that it is an allegory, and there are also people, you know, people of color or different genders or sexualities or anything like that also in the story, so that you don't separate those ideas from the actual people in the real world that those ideas come from.
Minder, if you want to speak next a little bit about how you go about just slice of life work.
Most of the stories that I'm posting were just very personal to me. That's kind of where the foundation was built. There are things I've been through, or a lot of, mining my friends for stories of their lives. But I really, I think there was something John was saying earlier about like that rule about like sci-fi and like that one element which kind of affects everything else, which had a fancy name, which I've already forgotten. But that to me was the most exciting part about the world building, was that it was all about eye count. There's Cyclops in Two Wide World, and it's all about how that eye count affects the world. Very much like, I guess, Thirsty Mermaids, like a very fish out of water, to use the pun, I guess, kind of a story of people feeling othered. And I got to then explore on top of that all these comics, which then build on that in the slice of lifestyle, on acceptance through the erotica, and they become like the pinup idea of and being sexualized to be accepted, but then also how the world is affected by the Cyclops, and how they would advertise now makeup specifically to Cyclops, or to push them to try and look more like Two Eyes, or eye surgery. But underneath all of it, it's always about the other. It's secretly about race. It's about my personal experiences every time. But the idea of like making it plausible, which has really like fascinated me, and just in this talk already, is that's where the humor also came from, was the specificity of making the eye count be that thread through all of it. Was that although I get to tell this story that's secretly about race, underneath it all, I also get to then make a joke about eye count, about how like there's an optometrist who only works for Cyclops because she only has to work half of the time. And that's just like the added bonus, I guess, of that string of plausibility. So a lot of them were personal stories, and stories that I would try and find a buzz or like energy around them, that something like themes that I could explore. So there was a lot of acceptance through eroticism, like I mentioned, microaggressions, and just a lot of the minority experiences informed which comics were not on the cutting board. Because there were plenty of like puns that I could have done. And then a lot of it was also just tone, what felt right for the kinds of comics I tell. And also there's a tone which is more effective in long form, and there's a very different tone for slice of life and what people expect from just picking up a book and only reading a couple of comics at a time. So it was a mishmash of doing all of that. But it was, I feel like I'm learning a lot already in this panel. So it's been really good so far.
If any of the audience has not gotten a chance to read Cyclopedia Exotica, one of the things that Aminder does particularly well, that she mentioned early on, is kind of, I guess, showing how capitalism would manipulate kind of what is out there, for for the Cyclopses in that world. Like that was, I mean, I am still just emotionally messed up over Braun in particular for obvious reasons. But I think that is one of the selling points of your world building, was keeping in mind like those little things, you know, that are not little, you know, that every single like piece of merchandise out there was like kind of basically a stab to the heart, right?
That to me is the weight of microaggressions, is that at some point you have so many that you can't even count them as micro because you're dying under the weight. And I just felt like, mining my own experiences, it was the skin whitening creams, which were huge in Indian communities, stuff like that. Or I've always had curly hair, and like straight hair, being part of that Avril Lavigne 2000s age of just like desperately trying to like straighten it all out. But that adds up so, and it's so heavy, and you don't even realize how much you've just been all this weight you've been walking around with, until you finally get to sit back and look and have some just some time away from it all.
So for John, one of the things is a lot of the work that you are particularly known for, and the, you know, the Nettie adaptation recently, is that you are world a lot of times in a world that already exists.
Right.
And I wanted, but like you also do your own original work, and a little bit about kind of that process of world building in someone else's world in that way, because at least from my perspective, it feels a lot different from, say, straight up licensed work. You know, and when do you end up finding that you need to do actual world building to fill in spaces because it's a visual medium?
I was very fortunate that, you know, I'm good friends with Nettie, and so we actually talked quite a bit about, you know, the story itself. I've been a fan of the short story that we adapted into After the Rain. It's called On the Road, for many years, and it's probably the only horror, like straight up like horror story that she's written. She doesn't do a lot of scary stories like in that particular way, and so I think having her kind of chime in on some of the visuals was very helpful. And the other thing too is we always have to remember that whenever you're doing an adaptation from one medium into the other, that you're already like shifting the story, because each medium has a different set of affordances and rules, you know. So just by changing it into a comic, we've already changed the story. You know, that's one thing, because comics tell stories very differently. So one of the things we try to like, you know, really dial into when it comes to like world building with someone else's work is, especially in comics, is that to remember that every aspect of a comic book page can be used to tell a story, from the panel design to the gutter. We use the gutter quite a bit in this story, for instance, to kind of talk about the other world that our main character Chioma was experiencing. But then also, you know, I'm really keen on color. I'm uncredited, but I did the colors on the book too. So it's almost like a soundtrack to the book, that kind of thing. And also remembering that comics as a medium they feel inherently surreal, you know? And I think because of that surreality, you can actually like naturalize a lot of things in these speculative worlds very easily, you know, because of the inherent surreality of it. I mean, for instance, if we were like sitting at a dinner table and a guy in an orange rabbit suit came and sat down, we would be tripped out. But I was like, what the heck is going on? But if we're in a comic book and someone in a rabbit suit, or a rabbit, you know, comes down and sits down, we're like, oh, hey, Harry, you're late. You know, here's your drink. You know what I'm saying? So it's this idea of like the normalization of the strange that I think is a really big part of the comics medium. So, but yeah, and there's a lot of editing. You know, a lot of stuff we have to cut out too, because you know, sometimes narratives are longer, and you know, sometimes it's strange to have to do that, to actually like limit things, but sometimes you show and you don't tell, you know, that kind of thing. So it's really kind of a slippery slope, but you want to make sure that the affect of the story is true. And we were very fortunate that, Nettie is still with us. And unlike when we worked on the Octavia Butler books, where it was like a lot of stuff just had to be figure out. So anyway, I feel like I was rambling a little bit. Am I okay? So,
no, not at all. And one of the things I wanted to note in particular that you brought up is that all of you use layouts in very different ways. I like, just in terms of from the number of panels to like how complex or simple the layouts are, and how the choice of like the style of layout that you choose kind of affects the tone of the story, right? The seemingly simpler paneling could make a joke land harder, in Aminder's book, but at the same time with in Thirsty Mermaids, some of it is the hysterical chaos on the page, right? Especially with that choreographed fight scene with Tooth, which I really appreciated. And then Tim kind of alternates where primarily they're full page spreads with some really stunning digital work, and then like John was saying, the very frames of the panel itself telling you where you're located in the story, which is again one of those specific tools that I think we have access to in comics that you don't get to see in other formats, which is really fun. I know that I think we're running towards the end. So I wanted to kind of expand the conversation to be a little bit about what is media that you guys think that like handles world building well, where if you were to go, cool, after you're done buying all of our books on this panel, as you surely will, I am sure, what is the next thing that you think someone should look at or would inspire someone?
Got one. I'll just pop in and say my favorite fantasy series of all time that's been very influential on me is the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett, my favorite author. There's 40 plus books in the series. You don't even need to start at the beginning, but it is some of the best world building I've ever experienced. And it starts from a place of parody, which I love. And it just goes from there. And I could gush forever, but I won't. I'll let someone else go.
Anybody?
Super Mutant Magic Academy by Jillian Tamaki was one that is very close to my style of work as well, but like it's again, that slice of life, just kind of introduce little elements of this world, and like within 2-3 comics you understand how the world works, and you get it. You're just up for anything as the story continues. So I really appreciate the storytelling in there. And then also to The Prince and the Dressmaker really surprised me at how quickly I believed every step of everything in that world. And I don't know anything about dressmaking, but I felt like an expert by the end of it. So anything that can make me feel like an expert very quickly, I guess I'll quote. But I also, with comics, it's anything that makes me read them in a different way. I'm so used to, I have a silly habit of going from prose to comics and devouring the words while like skimming over the images, which I really hate, like going back and forth between these two styles. So anything which makes me stop and look at the visuals, the hidden jokes, just a different style artistically. I just love to see that kind of stuff.
Tim, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I think I'm at a point now where I'm looking back a lot. So you can see here, I got Mobius, my Mobius books there. I've had to hunt those suckers down. So I'm looking back a lot, and I'm looking back at a lot of artists, a lot of band designated artists who really, made my foundation, but also a few folks who are doing some exciting things just because they're finishing. Like this book here was that one. Dedrin Sneed sent me this book he did with Nichelle Nichols. He finished it. I'm very proud of him for that. So it's an interesting time where it's like, there's so much stuff coming out through Kickstarter. I just got Jeff Smith's book in, Tukey, the other day. It's just, there's such an avalanche of stuff coming down. There's no way I can read all of it. I'm just fascinated by the process, the fact that anybody can do it at this point, and good or bad, and I love it. It's like a circus with blades.
So really, I have several things I'm really excited about. I'm a massive Whovian, so that's my favorite sci-fi thing is Doctor Who, and I love the fact that you have a show where like the main character changes and then the scenery changes constantly, and you do have fixed parts, but whenever I'm trying to create a story, I try to create something, I try to Whoify it so it has like a lot of like flexibility built into the infrastructure of the story. The other thing too is like I'm a designer, so I'm really attracted to like Jonathan Hickman's work in comics, right? Because he actually uses like design in the story. I'm really into metafiction, so people like that use metafiction I'm really attracted to as well. And then also too, I'm not a gamer by any, not a video gamer, but BioShock Infinite's world is just extremely. I collect the books, like I collect the art books. They're like just insanely inspirational and just very deep and beautiful. And then of course RPGs, as far as like the world building and role playing games, I think are extremely dense and beautiful. There's this book called I think it's called Harlem Unbound. It's a Cthulhu, it's a Call of Cthulhu extension, and the
By
research they did
Chris.
on the Harlem Renaissance is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, so
Has builds for like the Harlem firefighters, are like the Harlem Hellfighters and everything, like just so beautifully done. I legitimately got that supplement just for like exploring building in that specifically.
It's phenomenal. Okay, that's all I got.
It's really funny because I try to avoid answering questions for myself, but one of the things that has been really useful to me recently with world building is focusing on things that you enjoy that you feel shouldn't work or shouldn't be plausible. And so like you were talking about games, and for me, even though I don't pull any of the world building into my work, the Yakuza series of video games in particular, completely just bonkers. There is nothing about that, like it's like a deep, serious mob story, but then also if you win a bowling match, like you get a rooster to like manage your real estate. And I'm not making any of those words up, because and the reason that I kind of bring that up at right before I kind of like wrap up and we tell everybody kind of where they can find you guys is because I also think that a lot of times, if you have not been in the industry for very long, it's easy for you to look at any world building that you've done and think it's ridiculous, to think it doesn't work. And one of the things that I found whenever I start getting into that is writing literal sentences of the worlds. Writers like you guys have existed, like that have created, and the fact that if I hadn't fallen in love, I would have been like, what are you doing? But no, it works because you guys have built in the plausibility, right? It's because you guys have brought in your own cultures and experiences and communities into making these worlds work. And I think that that's why a panel like this is important, right? Where you guys have worked in very different genres, different tones, right? But you guys have built these really beautiful worlds that work because you guys did all like the back end stuff of being like, what is enough to make me accept the plausibility, right? It doesn't have to be the science of it. It has to be what brings you on the ride and what doesn't pull you out of it, right? Now, I know we're about to wrap up. Kind of like the broadness of a question like world building means that unfortunately I wasn't able to get to the Q&A tonight. I do think though that a lot of what has been discussed does kind of get into kind of the general concepts of what all the questions we're kind of posing, the idea of our own personal experiences, how we approach structure and storytelling and world building as a whole. And I'm just so grateful that you guys took time out of your evening, to kind of be with us, both as a panel and to the panelists as well. If you guys still have questions afterwards, I don't know which of y'all are all on Twitter, but I mean, I'm very on Twitter all the time. I should be less on Twitter, but that's fine. You guys can kind of tell people where they can find you, and you guys can, reach out, say hey to the creators you love, and if they have time, they might get a chance to respond. So again, I'm just going to go in reverse order of how you guys show up on my screen. So Tim, do you want to start?
Infinitum, go to harpercollins.com and buy as many copies as you can. I got to earn out. They don't give you all the money at once.
And Tim, do you want to tell people where they can find you?
HarperCollins, harpercollins.com to Amazon. Go for it. Infinitum by Tim Fielder. You got it. That's it.
Aminder?
I'm sure Cyclopedia Exotica should be available in most comic book stores, so support your local bookstore. And then they can find me, I'm not much on Twitter, but on Instagram at Aminder_D, and I do try and answer people's questions if they ask them.
Kat?
You just Google my name, Kat Leyh, Katleyh. You can find me on Twitter and Tumblr are where I post the most.
And John?
Okay, so the book again is After the Rain with Abrams Megascope. You can find me on Twitter at J.I. Jennings, and I do have a website, John Jennings Studio, all one word, and you should be able to contact me there as well.
And again, I'm Danny Lohr. You can find me Twitter or Instagram, mostly Twitter, Weredogs, WEREDAWGZ, because I have a brand and it is just werewolves. Thank you guys so much for joining us and for joining the Brooklyn Book Fest. Again, right below the stream, there's a buy books link. Just buy all of their books. We want all of them to earn out, and if they've already earned out, to get more money, get more books from them. So have a great night, guys.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you, Danny.
Awesome. Bye-bye.